So, we start Discourse 2 in Hemshech Ayin Beis. It's page 8, volume 1, and it's chapter 5, the beginning of chapter 5. Now, as I mentioned, I think that all these discourses were written in one flow, and then later when the Rebbe Rashab delivered them on the different Shabbos or holidays, he added the beginnings and ends that connect them to the particular time period or holiday in which they were delivered. So Discourse 2 begins Oita Kasalma. It's a discourse on the second night of Shavuos. Discourse 1 began, as we learned earlier, with the Shah Dimu, was on Shavuos itself, probably maybe the first night or the first day. This is the second night. And it begins Oita Kasalma, which means he wraps himself with light like a garment. Neita Shemayim Kiriya, and he spreads out the heavens like a wrapping, like a covering, like a tapestry. We have to understand what is the connection of the Eita Erev and Neita Shemayim. What is the connection between these two statements? That wrapping like light like a garment, and the heavens are like a tapestry. So to understand this, he's beginning to preface. He prefaces, let's preface what we learned earlier. So briefly, what was we learned earlier in the first discourse, in the first 4 chapters? The key thing he discussed there was the example, how the specific faculties come into a primistic and internalized and integrated, individualized way in each of the parts of the body. Every faculty has its particular container. Vision, the eye. Hearing, the ear. Speech, the mouth. The mind, inside the brain, and so on. So each faculty manifests in this particular and unique and distinctive container. And the faculty, mislabis, dresses in it, misgal gets revealed in it, and becomes one with it. So it's not just an incidental relationship, but they actually join and fuse as one in how they serve as faculties. And therefore, according to the personality, according to the, I guess the word would be the environment of the organs or the parts of the body, that's how the faculties will perform and actualize. In other words, God forbid, if let's say someone has sore eyes, it will affect the vision. If someone has something stuck in their ear. So in other words, the faculties are dependent upon the containers. And the containers in any way, so they're basically like a hand inside a glove, they fit into each other. And this was all coming to explain, remember, the whole point of departure is understanding these individualized faculties, that the structure of existence, starting from the existence of each of us, is defined by these parameters, these what we call keches pnimim, the pnimi. The structure of existence is defined by very clear, delineated and defined parameters. It's not at all abstract. Is in contrast to another form of energy that exists within us and within existence. That is what we call the hovering energy. This is the permeating one. That would be called the transcendental one. The one that or makif, like the will, that we want something that does not manifest. Where does your willpower rest? Not in your brain, and not in your heart, and not in your liver, and not in other organs. The will manifests in every part of the body, wherever it needs to manifest. If you want to move your toe, or you want to think, or you want to walk, you want to write, or you want to drive, or you want to look at something. So will is doesn't have a particular container. So this is all, as we're speaking about dissecting existence, because as we said, the whole purpose of this is to find the interface between the divine and the material, between heaven and earth. And the interface, as he said, began with Keser, the crown, the Rotzen, that you have to will something. For something to be connected to something, you have to want to be there. So you could have two entities, a teacher and a student. If the teacher doesn't want to be there with the student, the will is the first step, the first interface that allows the teacher to get closer to the student and the student to the teacher. But to understand will, which is a makif, he's right now we're elaborating on the specific faculties and the specific elements as they break down, as we said, in a structure, very delineated parameters. So now we begin chapter 5. Okay?
Yep.
All this that we discussed about the internal faculties and how they match and are tailored toward each other, the Ur and the Keli, the energy and the container, the faculty and its respective organ or respective space inside the body, is all to help us understand how things are on the spiritual, what we call the Supernal Man, which is really a way of saying that the human being is a microcosm, is an expression of the larger organism, which is all of existence. So with this we will understand how it is above, L'mayla, meaning more on the spiritual levels, in the shape of the Supernal Man, in which we were shaped. So even though, of course, he immediately qualifies, God doesn't have any shape and form, as we say in the verse, even though he does not have the shape of a body, or a body, because only creatures, only defined realities like us that were created have these types of shapes and forms. Nevertheless, it does say, this is in the book of Ezekiel, Yecheskel says, and the vision of Ezekiel, he had this prophetic vision, it says that on the image of this chair, of the throne, was the image and reflection of a human. So essentially he had this vision where he saw the image of a chair. The image. Imagine like in a dream. You have a dream-like state, you dream of a chair, of a throne. You dream of someone sitting on that throne. So you can't call them, it's not an actual tangible reality, it's a vision of it. It's like a picture of it. Portrait. So therefore you can see from this, in the vision, that there is a way that divine manifests in the shape of, and the image of, and the reflection and picture, portrait of a human, of a human being. Now of course, this is not referring to the divine essence, the essence of the infinite divine light, which of course is beyond any type of form, even a shape in a dreamlike state, even in a vision form, it doesn't even have that type of shape. The Mash'amr in the Dmus, because what now he's explaining, what Ezekiel is saying when he sees that vision. I'm sorry, no. Let me stand correctly. When it says that God has no image at all, we're talking primarily on the level of the essential divine infinite light that's higher than Atzilus. Because remember, in the structure of the cosmic order, there's worlds. Worlds are really just dimensions, levels. So when we say that he has no shape, you're talking about the essential light, divine energy that's higher than the world of Atzilus. Whereas Atzilus does have at least the image at least on a conceptual level, an ethereal level of a body. And this is what it says. When you say the Musa Guf V'Guf, he mentioned before there's two things. When we say God has no image of a body and has no body. What's the difference between these two? So Shehiksha B'Shalah, the Shalah of Yitzchak Horowitz, a great mystic and great sage and scholar, 16th century, he asked the following question. What is the redundancy? Or what is the meaning of these two terms, that he has no shape of a body, he has no body? Since Since he doesn't have the image of a body, he obviously doesn't have a body. Understand the question? You understand the question? Well, why do we have to say he has no image of a body and he has no body? If he has no image of a body, obviously he has no body. So why does he have to add the matzorach lem and ein le guf? Why does he have to say that? So it's explained in another place. Hatirat tells that in another place. The answer is given on this. The demusa guf, the image or shape of a body, is the level of biyah, bri yitzir asiyah. That's how it manifests. The divine manifests in the lower worlds of biyah, bri yitzir. Creation, formation, and action. Yeah. They're the four worlds. Atzilus is the higher world, the divine unity world, and then there's biyah. So that refers to the musaguf, like we say in the verse in the Bible, in Bereshis, when it says Nasa Adam B'Tzalmenu Kidmusenu. God says, let us create a human being in our tselem and our demus, in our image and in a reflection of us, in our shape. What's the difference between the two? So he's saying that the musaguf, the shape of a body, that's biyah, that's kidmusenu, that's the demus, that's the image of. Tselem is more like portrait of. The guf hu b'chinas Atzilus, and the body itself, that's the level of Atzilus. K'maymer kama gufin tekinun lahum.
Wait a second. You say the body itself is Atzilus, is higher than the image of the body?
Yeah, that's what he's saying. In one place it says it that way.
It would seem that from what you said earlier, the image
would be higher. I know.
Than the specific manifestation.
I know, but this is how he explains it here.
Okay.
I guess it means to say, because it's not talking about body, it's talking about like the actual image. You actually is an actual full spiritual bodied entity, and Biyah is only a reflection of it. That's the way he's interpreting it here. Mm-hmm. It would seem to be the other way around, I know, but that's how it's explained here, at least. Mm-hmm. I would have to research it more. Okay. Like it says, how many bodies did he shape? Did he repair? Did he build? All this, however you twist and turn it, whether it's the image of the body or it's the body itself, that's not applicable to Atzmus, to the essence of the divine light. All this is Atzilus and lower. Follow?
Yep.
So actually a parenthesis all this that I just read. It's coming to basically qualify and explain the statement. If you say that all that we've discussed about the structure of the human body is reflection of the structure of the supernal body, so he came to just qualify and say we're not talking about the essence of the divine, we're talking about the divine manifests in these levels, and there he talked about the two guf and musa guf, the image of the body and the body itself. Yeah, clearly you can say both ways, okay. So what is it talking about? What are we talking about when we say shape and form of a supernal man? We're talking about we're talking about the energies and the revelations of the divine light, the infinite divine light, that manifested in 10 spheres of Atzilus. So when you look at the word...
The energies? What was the word you used? You said, what are we talking about?
Energies and revelations.
Energies.
Of the divine infinite light that comes down, that manifests in the 10 spheres. So the world of Atzilus is a spiritual world that has a structure of 10 spheres, 10 manifestations, okay? Which is a parallel to and a mirror image of how it is in our bodies. We're also made up of 10 faculties. But this is all a lower level than the essence of the divine light, which doesn't have any shape and form. Okay? Then he qualifies this further. The Gam Ba'Atzilus, and even in Atzilus, even in the world of Atzilus, where there is already manifestation of 10 spheres, it's higher than finite expressions.
Yeah.
He's going to explain what that means. Because in our, as we spoke about, in our human structure, everything was finite. We reviewed earlier, everything. For example, ideas from your mind. The idea is parameters. How far it can extend has parameters. How you explain it has parameters. However you twist and turn it, our human faculties are defined by parameters. In Atzilus, however, now he's going to say that even though there are defined faculties, but they don't have the same parameters. They have an element that has an element of unlimited parameters. What does that mean? Chachma is chachma, bina is bina, chesed is chesed, love is love. But here's an interesting thing you're going to see. It's love like we have love, but there's a distinction. What's the distinction? In Atzilus, the spheres extend infinitely. They are defined, but they extend infinitely. And they're also called 10 spheres without substance. So, for example, in our case, intellect can only go that far, right?
Yeah.
In Atzilus, there's also intellect, but intellect has no limit how far it can go. There's no limit how much love can be given. So it's a defined, think of it like this. It's 10 defined paths, but the paths themselves, each one in their own world, goes on forever, can go on forever. Whereas in our parameters, we have the 10 paths, but they have also limits how far they can go. So you see what I'm saying? So basically, how would we put it? Vertically, they're limited, but no, the other way around. What's vertical? Horizontal is...
That's horizontal, that's vertical.
Okay, so horizontally, they're limited. They're only like this. Chachma begins here and ends here. But vertically, it can go forever.
In Atzilus.
Not Tzilut.
Not below.
Not below.
So below, it's limited both horizontally and vertically.
Correct. And they're also called spheres without substance. That's another element. So besides the fact that they can go on forever, they also have no substance. That means that they're defined, but they have an element that is still ethereal, still intangible. Like it says in the book of Yetzirah, in the book of formation, attributed to Abraham. It talks about the 10 spheres, and this is the words that he uses. Midasan Ese, their number, their measurement is 10. That's the 10 spheres. She'ein lahem sof, 10 that have no end. Shegam k'may she'em b'bchinas midah v'shir. That means that even as they are in its parameters, in a measured and defined parameter of 10, b'bchinas muhusim v'yechadim, on page 9, and they're separate muhusim, they're separate personalities, separate identities. Nevertheless, they're still without limit, Ein Sof. They're still endless. They explained in another place. So he doesn't really elaborate on the meaning of it, but think of it, as I said, that we have now here really 3 levels. There's the divine essence that has no shape and form altogether. Not vertical, not horizontal. You can't even call it 10 spheres. You can't call it anything. It doesn't have any definition. It's a completely infinite light, which you can say encompasses everything within it, but it's not defined by any parameters. Okay? Except that it exists.
Yep.
Then you have stage 2, Atzilus.
Yep.
Now we have 10 parameters. 10 distinct identities that have parameters. But the parameters are still not completely been limited. They are now 10, but each of them can go on endlessly, and each of them has still a level of certain abstract dimension that keeps them blima, without substance, that still has an element of Ein Sof in them. So yes, it's chesed, it's not gvura. It's love, not discipline, but love that can go on endlessly. And then we have the third dimension, the way it's on our level, the created level. Where now not only do these 10 properties, these 10 identities have individual personalities, but they also have limited expression. They can't go on forever. Each of them is fundamentally limited. So think of it this way. If I could say this, listen to this. Imagine, here we have eyesight. With your eyes you can see a certain distance. Let's say you can see a mile, half a mile, a quarter mile. So your eyesight is limited and the power of your vision is limited, how far you can see. But imagine someone had eyesight and they can see hundreds of miles. It's still has a human structure because there's eyesight. We can't envision it because we don't really see anyone that has that type of eyesight, but conceptually there's structure, but the structure is still in a state of like an infinite powers. Whereas the divine essence you don't even talk in that time. You can't even talk about eyesight. Beyond it all. He sees everything all the time and so on. So you see here's like gradations of how the infinite turns into the finite.
Yeah.
Again, you see interface here. You can sense it. You understand? So there's really, in other words, in the process of reconnecting and reuniting through the interface, essentially what we'd like to do is connect our finite vision with the infinite vision of the supernal man that can see for miles and miles, or infinite vision, and then from there jump to the infinity of the divine that is beyond vision altogether. Got it?
Can we reach that level?
Yes, that's part of that through work. That's what we're going to learn, how we do that. But for example, here's how it goes. I'm just giving you an example, okay?
Yeah.
We can be very narcissistic, selfish creatures. So when we love somebody, it could be a narcissistic love.
Right.
What's in it for me?
Right.
I don't get what I want, I'm out of here. It's conditional. It could even be cruel. But let's just say it's a love, but it's a love with definition. When Torah teaches us how your love becomes more selfless. So it's not just defined by your moods or by your whims, and your love becomes more infinite, more unconditional, more giving in all circumstances. So essentially you're drawing down from the chesed of Atzilus, the love of Atzilus, and its ability to love endlessly, into the limited love that we mortals have.
Drawing down the love from where?
From the love of Atzilus, where the love is endless, we draw down into our own love.
Yeah.
Through our humility, through working on ourselves, through sublimating our animal instincts and selfish desires, and survival instincts, we weaken that, and in turn, we draw down the love of Atzilus into our love down in Asiya here in this world. So our love becomes a much more expansive one, much more unconditional one, much more selfless one.
Hi, Shandy. Mazel tov.
That continues to draw and extend itself endlessly. You follow what I'm saying?
Yep.
That's the beauty of the interface of Atzilus, because it allows us that bridge. It's on our terms, but it's infinite vision, infinite love. You get it?
Yep.
Nevertheless, even though in Atzilus, we continue, even though in Atzilus there is an Ein Sof, that the defined personalities of the 10 spheres are defined and they go infinitely, but nevertheless they are b'chinas sir Adam. They do have the shape of an Adam. They said they still look like us, except it has this infinite power. It's like a Superman, so to speak, a primordial Superman. Maybe Superman is actually an example for the man of Atzilus. Shamayim man, the heavenly man. What's the structure of a human being? Chesed deraiva yamina. Love is the right arm, the right side. Gvura deraiva desmala. Gvura, discipline, is on the left side. Chachma moicha. Chachma, the wisdom, is in the mind. In other words, there's a structure. There's 10 spheres. But I just said horizontally there's 10. Vertically it's infinite, but there is a horizontal structure. So this is nice, huh?
It's great. Great.
The b'chinas islapshus erbi keli. And this structure is defined by the energy, the light, manifesting, getting dressed up in a container. As we spoke earlier about the faculties, that the light, energy, it doesn't just enter the keli, it grasps it, it unites with it. It's not the word, it's not really unite. Tfisa means, like you could have something just passes through, let's say a funnel, passes through liquid, but you could have the liquid goes into a cup. It's not yet merges, it's more, it's in a way that it holds on to. It retains and stays there in some way. Tfisa can be both from the top, yeah, that you actually can hold it. You have the liquid in here. In a funnel, you can't hold on to it, just passing through. I remember when a few people came from the class, I brought them to my father's home. My father said to them, so are you tourists or residents? You're just passing through? Yeah. It was an interesting expression. Like people go to Israel to pass through. Right. But they don't remain. I don't just mean physically. Yeah. Spiritually, it's like a what do they call it? A tour seeing guide.
A what?
No, what do you call a tour? Tourists are a seeing guide. When a guide, like a seeing eye guide or something.
Seeing eye dog.
No, like a tourist, basically just to see. Right. I'm just here to see. I'm not here to stay.
Right. Passing through.
Yeah, passing through. So here it's not just passing through; it actually manifests. Sheyesh l'chol ar, every energy. Now, if we look at this, you compare this to chapter 4 and chapter 3, you'll see how he literally goes each piece of the puzzle, as he described it in the human being below, in our faculties. You'll see how that, actually chapter 2, 3, and 4, how now he shows how the same applies to the structure of the Supernal Man in Atzilus. So basically, it says every energy, every light or energy, has its klei miyuchedes, has its particular and specific and distinct container. According to that commensurate, proportionate to that container is the energy that enters the container. So, he's going to discuss this on many levels, but just on a basic thing, let me say this, that when the energy enters the cup, right, it takes on the shape of the cup. So they match each other. Certain things wouldn't fit into this cup, so they couldn't combine the two. The Kli HaChachma, giving an example. For example, the container of Chachma, of wisdom. Ukeli le'era Chachma dafka. It's a container specifically for Eira Chachma, not for Eira Habina. It's not for the energy of Bina. The Klei Habina le'era Habina dafka. And the container for Bina, for understanding, not just wisdom, for the elaboration and fleshing out of the idea, is a container for Eira Bina, the right brain, left brain. The Chen Ba'amidas, and the same thing with the emotions. Chesed, V'gvura, etc. Love, discipline, and so on. That every energy, every faculty, every power has its particular and distinct, unique container. As it's known that the containers have different levels. There's differences between them. Like it says in Eitz Chaim, like the chiyui b'chinas hameichin. There's an expression in the Zohar that says iyu v'chayu echad, iyu v'garmu echad. He is one with the energy, and he's one with the garmuhi. So they ask the question, what's chayu, what's garmuhi? I mean, literally chayu is energy, garmuhi is what he causes. So he answers, chayu, energy is the mind, is the intellect, cognitive faculties, and garmuhi is the emotional ones. So we see from that there are different levels. There are things that are called intellectual, and there are the emotional. he just to explain to elaborate a bit more. He brings a Geras HaKodesh, which is the 20th section in the 20th chapter in the 4th book of Tanya. He interprets it differently. Chayui, he says, Hua Oir, is the energy. You say Chayui, life, the life force, he's one with his life force, is called the Oir, the energy. For Garmui refers to the Kalim, the containers. So basically, in Eitz Chaim, the Arizal says one is intellect and one is emotions. In Tanya, he explains them as being energy and containers. So if you combine both these sources, what do we conclude? He says like this. This means in the intellect, even the containers are also in the level of Chayuhi. They're also like the energy.
The intellect, the containers are like the energy?
Yeah. He's basically reconciling these two interpretations by saying that if you say the intellect is Chayuhi, then the reason is, and in Tanya he said that Chayu is the energy, and remember he said everything has energy and containers, so he's saying that the containers, when it comes to intellect, they're also on the level of the energy. But they're still containers. Let me explain like this. Like for example, the brain is a much more refined and subtle container than, for example, your fingers. I mean, we see this practically. The brain is much more fragile, needs more protection, much more complicated to do brain surgery than to do, let's say, finger surgery. Because the brain is a container, the container there itself is more of a ethereal one, because it fits to the function of the brain, which is the mind. The mind needs a brain that, let's put it this way, a barrel wouldn't be a proper container for a brain.
Right.
You need something, the brain itself is just an appropriate type of gel or subtle, and to do all the processes that the mind needs. So basically, in other words, every container is tailored to what it is delivering. That's the beauty of the whole picture here. So with that being said, okay, so the containers are also a level of Chayui, which really reconciles these two things. Because in Eitz Chaim he said Chayui is the intellect. In Tanya, in Geras HaKodesh, he said it's the light. The answer is because the intellect, even the containers, are also like light. The Kalim, the Midas, on the other hand, the container for emotions, which is called Garmuhi in Eitz Chaim, and Tanya calls Garmuhi, Hem Kalim Rak Le'er HaMidas. They're just containers for the energy of the emotions. Not really reconciling, he's just using both these statements to discuss this thing with lights and containers. Okay. Now he's going to qualify all this by saying, even though he's asking a question. We just said that the containers are fitting to the energy and everyone is tailored, but we see something interesting. We see intellect, for example, manifests and dresses up even in lower levels. The intellect can also be used, for example, your mind also tells your legs where to go, etc. Your mind manifests itself in other faculties. So we see from that it's not so distinct and unique. It's not just the mind stays in the brain, in its container. It goes also into other containers and affects other parts of our body. You follow?
Yeah.
So he's going to explain what that means. So, for example, you see that the mind can dress up and manifest in the movement of the arm and in the walking power of the legs, of the leg. Same thing when it comes to emotions, to love. For example, chesed on the right side. That this is the external emotion. To extend, let's say you extend your right arm to help somebody. So you're doing something loving. Also has an element of intellect in it. And he explains, according to Kabbalah, this is what it says, the Gimel Pirkin Shebiyad. The three things in the arm. You have the wrist, what is this called?
Forearm.
The forearm and the bicep, right?
Arm, forearm, wrist.
Okay. And
The same speaking, this is the arm, this is the forearm.
Okay. And then even a finger, you have the 3, 1, 2, 3.
Right.
So he says these three sections in the arm are, according to Chabad, Chagas, and Nihi. Remember, we talk about the spheres. The spheres have 3 dimensions, right? Chabad is intellect, Chagas is emotions, and Nihi, Netzach Chod Yisod, are more like implementing emotions. Okay? So the 3 parts of the arm are considered to be the intellect within the arm, the emotions within the arm, and the implementers within the arm. So we see that Chabad, intellect, also exists in other faculties. In this case, in the arm, which is like chesed. So every midah, every emotion has these 3 elements in it. Follow what I just said?
Mm-hmm.
Because even when we feel something, it also has an element of mind at work. Like the seichel, we see the mind, the mind compels the transmission of love. The mind makes sense and directs and compels us to be loving. And when you actually express that love, that's how it comes down in action, how it's implemented. But the mind compels us and pushes us to love and to express love, like he explains elsewhere. That's even the external dimension of the emotions. The kolshkein, and definitely and definitely the inner dimension of the emotions, shebelev adam elyon, in the heart of the supernal man, kavyachol, so to speak, which is higher than the actual action of loving. They definitely they definitely have the element of intellect in them. Like it says, like it says, God spoke to his heart. That this is the transmission of mind into emotions. Let me explain what he's saying here, okay? In human emotions, there's 2 parts to it. There's the implemented part, like when you love somebody, you have love in your heart. It's a feeling of affection, but it may not be implemented. And then you go ahead and do something for them that's an expression of that love. So he's calling the one external emotion and the other one inner emotion. The inner emotion is the feeling that you have, the affection, which is very real, but it's not yet expressed in a tangible way. And the expression of the emotion is how you express it. So he says in both of them, there is a mix of measure of intellect in both of them. And the outside, of course, expression of it, you use it as part of it is intellect, how to do it. And definitely the inner emotion, the affection, is also affected by your mind. That in turn helps intensify or arouse that affection or emotion. Same thing. So all this is part of the question that he's asking. We said that every faculty has its container. We see it clearly. There's an overlap and interaction between different faculties. He's going to explain it, but he's asking it because since he said everything is distinct and very separate one from the other, how do we explain this interrelationship, this interweaving of these faculties? The same thing, the level of malchus. What is malchus? That is like an example of the power to walk in the legs, because malchus is the lowest level of the 10 spheres. So an example for it would be the lowest faculties in the body are the legs, walking in the legs. the Atzilus. That's the end, the bottom of all the levels in Atzilus, Kamashal HaRegel, similar to a regel, to a leg, which is the bottom of the body. And then he adds in a parenthesis, V'gam Rikr Regel Liya Shaba V'ayodei Nimshach HaGili Be'elim Shalamata. Another reason it's called Regel. Why do we compare this lower level to a Regel? Because, not just because it's the bottom of the body, but it's also through it, in it, and through it comes the revelation in the world below it. In other words, Malchus, the lowest level of Atzilus, is what transmits energy into the next world, the lower world. Because as it's known that Malchus is revelation. It reveals the way the revelation of the 10 spheres itself. How do they reveal to lower levels? How do they manifest and transmit to lower levels? It's all through Malchus. That's why Hashem Zeh, therefore Nikra Regel, Malchus is called Regel, a leg, because a leg, just like the leg takes you from one place to the next, when you walk, the legs carry you, your mind can't carry you, your heart can't carry you, your legs have to carry you, so too Malchus carries the spheres from one world to the next. So there's two aspects to this Regel, that is the lowest level, but also the force that carries the higher levels to the next level. You understand that?
Mm-hmm. Is the word that Malchus called leg, is that the Hebrew word you use?
Yeah, Regel.
Regel?
Leg.
R-E-G-E-L, Regel?
In Hebrew, Regel is Reish Gimel Aleph, Regel, R-E-G-E-L, yeah. Foot is also Regel, foot, the legs. Yesh b'zeh gam ken b'chinas hameichin. So even this, the power to walk and to transmit to lower levels, also has within it the level of intellect, meichin. And he explains, what is this? This is the wisdom that is invested and within creation, within Ma'aseh Bereshis creation. Like it says, the Kulam b'chachma sisa, you, God in other words, have created everything with wisdom. You've made everything with wisdom. So we see from that even the creation of the world, very basic level creation, is based on wisdom, based on intellect. How does it work? That the intellect, chachma, drew down, extended and manifested in Zah, in the Midas, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, and in Malchus. Like it says in the verse in Bereshis, in Genesis, it says, the Sheishis Yomim Asa Hashem, 6 days God made. So the Zohar asked the question, it should have said, in 6 days He made it. It's like missing a word. You say 6 days He created. No, He created, in 6 days He created the world. The answer is no, even the 6 He created. As part of the creation is creating the 6 dimensions. And these are the 6 midos, the 6 emotions of Zohar. Zohar Ampin, the small face. B'derech prat, and more specifically, Hey Midah Sheba Malchus. More specifically, they're the 6 emotions within Malchus. Because Malchus, as we said, is the creator, is the transmitter that brings everything down to the next world. Within them, they have they manifest intellect. That's what it says. Kulam b'chachma sisa, as we just read. Everything was made with wisdom. So, is it made with wisdom or is it made with these emotions and Malchus? The answer is that Malchus and the emotions carry within them and are directed by the captain of the ship or the captain of this, which is the mind. So we see from this that intellect is not just isolated, is not just relegated and limited to the brain. It affects the whole body. It affects all the faculties. And it affects, in the divine level, in the Adam Elyon, above there, the Supernal Man, it affects all the 10 spheres. And it's within all the 10 spheres. And that's why Hashem Zeh Nikra Malchus Chachma Tata. And even more, he makes the case even stronger. That's why we find that Malchus is called the lower wisdom. There's Chachmei Law, there's a higher wisdom, and there's a lower wisdom. Malchus is called the lower wisdom. So all this poses that big question, the question he's asking, or it's not really a question, it's to clarify. So what do we mean when we say that Chachma, we said that the brain is uniquely shaped for the mind, and is specifically for that, for the mind and nothing else. You see here the mind in many ways manifests throughout all the faculties, throughout the whole body. So now he qualifies and he explains. Nevertheless, all this is only a reflection of the mind. It's only It's only the reflection of the mind. It's not the mind itself. It's not the Atzmus HaMeichin. It's not the essence of the intellect that manifests and dresses itself up in Zun, in Zohar, in Nukva, in Zohar and Malchus. It's only the external and reflection of the mind. So you can't say the mind, like in the brain, the mind is actually there completely. When you walk with your legs and your mind is telling you walk here, don't walk here, you can't say the brain suddenly moved to your legs. A reflection of, or using more medical terms, the nerve system carries instructions from the mind to the leg. That's not the same thing as how the mind is inside your brain. Like we explained earlier, like we explained earlier with the example when intellect is inside of emotions. It's only the external part of the intellect. And the same thing, the same thing, the intellect within the arm and within the leg is also only intellect that's connected to action. For example, you can't say that the arm and the leg are containers to the brilliance and abstractions and profundity of intellectual activity. Part of the brain, a very external part that's connected to action, is telling the arm or the leg what to do. So just as this is an example using us, down below, the same thing, this is an example for above. The intellect that's in Zun, in Zohar and Malchus, in the emotions and in Malchus, it's not the essence of Moichin, of the intellect, it's only a reflection. Like it's known, and this is a little Kabbalistic, but I'll just read it, the Nehi de Ima, the lowest levels of Bina, of Ima, the mother, which is Bina, Nasim Moichin Lezah, become the intellect for the Midas.
What's Midas?
Zah. Emotions. Yeah. In other words, it's not the intellect itself as it is in its full intensity that becomes the emotions. It's only the lower part of the higher level becomes the mind of the lower level. The Zah Unihi. The Zah Nasim Meichel Nukva. And from Zah they become the intellect of Nukva, of Malchus. And within that there's a reflection from the 6 sides or the 6 emotions within Bina, within Ima. And this is just an expression in Kabbalistic, basically saying that within the emotions, the lower faculties, you only have a reflection of, and the outer level of the higher intellect. All this is just a reflection, and the external, superficial, or outer, maybe, external and outer dimension of Meichin. But the essence of the mind is begimel rishonos dafke. It's not in the lower midas. It's not in the lower emotions. It's in the first 3 powerhouse cognitive skills, chachma, bina, das. And then he refers us. I remember this is very thorough, so there's some dense lines here that refer to sources. Okay, and look into what it says. And ayin means more than to look. It means profoundly look. Ayin. To look deeply into Eitz Chaim. This is the book of the Arizal. Shara Partsufim, the gate of the faces, the images. Drush Gimel, the third drush, the third treatise. Zela Sheinei, and he's quoting from there. He's actually quoting. Ki ikar hameichin hu b'chinas neshama primis shebetecha gimel shemes mamash shel shenikra gimel shemes meichin. Just a moment. That the primary mind, the primary intellect, is a soul, the inner soul, within the three top levels, which is Chachma Bina Das. El Shenikra Hagimel Shem Esmech. But they're called the three levels of the intellect, Chachma Bina Das. And he explains, V'hainu, Hagimel Rishonis. That means that the three levels of Chachma Bina Das, which are all in the mind, the three dimensions of intellect, and Kelim Legili Era Meichen, they are containers for the revelation of the mind. Shoshamu Atzmus Umhusa Meichen, where, because there is where the etzem, the essence, and the inner personality of the intellect rest. And because they are containers to this energy, so the energy manifests to them in a pneumistic way, in an internal way, in a way that the kelim is revealed within those containers.
The containers are Chachma Bina Das?
Right, the containers of Chachma Bina Das. Ubekelim the midas, but in the containers of the emotions, there you only have really the energy of the emotions revealed. And when they have intellect, it's only the chitzeni, is only the external and of the intellect and its reflection alone. Because then all this is because the area is boim b'chinas, and the reason for all this proves even stronger the point that he's making, that every container has every energy has its particular container, because even when it does affect other containers, it's only reflecting it from an external and in a reflective way. It doesn't really manifest there. Because the lights, the energies, as we said, are truly premistic energies. They're truly internalized. And each one has their particular container and space, place, platform. And that's why the container has to be commensurate and proportionate to the energy that's in it, because since the energy needs to have, it dresses up in the container. In other words, if the intellect were not an er pnimi, was not an internalized energy, so you could have intellect just like will. It's all over. No particular, it's not localized to the brain, and it's affecting every part, but that's not the case. It has its place. It's a very distinct, unique, and localized and individualized and individual faculty, and needs its container that fits it. Yet, reflection of it also affects the rest of the body. So, for example, the sun, the body of the sun, even though sunlight reaches Earth, but the sunlight is only a reflection of the sun. The sun itself is only in one place in heaven. It's there. However, it reflects and it transmits, and light reaches from the sun to the earth. But the sun has its local place where it rests and where it remains. This concludes chapter 5. So I'll read the Kitzur and we'll conclude here. Here's just a summary of this chapter. He has a summary at the end of each chapter himself, Rabbi Rashab. V'adugma zel l'mayla, an example for this above. It's a summary of what we just read. Is Atzilus, the world of Atzilus is the Adam Elyon, is the Supernal Man. What does that mean? It's the energies as they manifest in the kelim. Love in the right arm, the right side, Chachma, Moicha in the mind, in the Chachma, wisdom in the brain, the mind. The slapshus er hamechen ubegimel shoshen is dafka, because the slapshus, the dressing up of the mind, of the real energy of the mind, is in the first three levels dafka, basically the three brains, right, center, and left brains, meaning chacham bina das. Ve'er hamidus b'klei hamidus, and the energy of midas of emotions is in the containers of the emotions. Now we also have the manifestation of the intellect in the emotions, and also in malchus. And that's what Malchus is called the wisdom of the creation of the universe, the wisdom within existence, within creation, but that's only a reflection. And the essence of the Meich and the essence of the mind is only in the Gimel Rishonish, is only in the three higher levels, which are true containers to this energy. And with this we conclude chapter 5 and its summary. We're now on page Yud, page 10.
Great, this is great.